welcome back again to this session. There are a couple of three announcements that I have to make. Let's see if I remember them all. The first one is apparent. You see that this slot is now at a conference, a telco, instead of a presential due to COVID. So that poses some challenges on the technical side. So this is one of the things that we need to actually do is to expect the question answering really at the end, because it's not so easy to switch from, let's say, the distant presentation. So I hope you understand. Of course, there would need, we will try to manage every questions, but let's be patient with that. Second announcement is that at the end of this presentation, the local organization will make an announcement on the practicalities on the hiking tour that will take. So don't go away from the room because there will be an announcement, just 1 minute announcement. Last but not least, let me just present the speakers and this slot. It's a very, very interesting slot from two well-known people coming from industry that in the past they also went in academia, they went to industry. And you can see Rafael and Julian, they are very knowledgeable about process mining practice. So this is a very interesting session because they will give you insights from how to adapt process mining from the industrial side. So without hesitation, let's welcome to Julian and Rafael, and let's give them the floor.
Thanks a lot. Should I go, Julian? All right, so thanks a lot for being here. Apologies for not being on site. So what we would like to do in this session here is to talk a bit about our view on process mining adoption, event log engineering, and data challenges. And specifically, we would like to talk about what is the necessity for having a log engineer in the first place? So how it came to happen in the way it does today, and how it's so important for today's adoption of process mining. And then we're going to move to the second point, which is the event log engineering practice. So here we're going to be using an example that we use also in our chapter, in book chapter, in order to highlight how we do it. In a very concrete example on SAP and Order-to-Cash. And there is a particular challenge when dealing with large data, and this regards the change tables on SAP, but also in other systems. And so that's why we have a session here on zooming in on the change tables and how we process them, and we'll close with some best practices. So I think, before we kick it off here, so it's very important to say that, I mean, if we sum up this experience that Julian has and the one I have, I guess we're going to end up with a number of centuries, not but actually decades of experience. So it's not the case that we're going to be able to do in 90 minutes what we did in the last, 5-10 years or something like that. So I think the point here is that to give you an idea of the complexity of this and what is important, and the hands-on work on doing this is always the best way to learn the process, right? But who we are, and I'll give them to Julian to start introducing himself, and then I go on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Welcome from my side as well. I made it to the guest house at least in Aachen, and then had a positive test, unfortunately, yesterday. That's also the reason why it shifted to today, but happy to do it remote in this setup now. I'm the head of data insights at AP Moller Maersk. If you've looked at the broadcasting of the Tour de France start in Denmark the past couple of days, then you've seen the product placement of our vessel going underneath the bridge while a yellow jersey went over it. So we are doing container shipping, but not only container shipping, kind of broadening out in global logistics in general. And of course, as you can imagine, a lot of data is created along logistics journeys, and not just since a vessel got stuck sideways in Suez. We should be able to leverage their value a lot better than we do. That's why I started with Maersk after being in consulting and with Siemens for a while, focusing on process mining for the past decade almost. And process mining for me is really about kind of increasing the odds when optimizing processes, because whenever you don't do it data driven or quantitatively driven, there's a lot of revelations down the road, and a lot of initiatives got stuck or get stuck once they realize or not even realize that the bottleneck was only shifted. So super fan of process mining. I'm not the typical academic presenter here in this forum, I think, but together with Raphael, I think we can give you a bit of a glimpse of what the day in, day out challenges for us are in working with large scale data in process mining. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, thanks a lot, Julian. From my end, so I'm principal director at Accenture Strategy and Consulting. And well, there and generally, when we think about consulting, what we are doing is always trying to understand how a client and the process within the client work. So and for doing this, it's paramount that you understand, in order to make consulting, you need to understand how it works today, in order to go into the future and address the topics which are there. So the traditional way of doing this, and actually I saw this also happening when I started doing my consulting career, was like, yeah, well, let's have a series of interviews. I've talked to a lot of people, make workshops, interviews, whatsoever, in order to get an understanding of the process. And then, pull the team into one room, the internal team, and then make our minds on how the process looks like and how it should be. And for me, using the data as a means to do so, it is way more reasonable for strategy and consulting to understand what as is. You're quick, we're faster, and have better insights. So using this is a paramount importance to go further on that. So in that capability, and then bring my background, I am responsible for data-driven process analytics within the German, Austrian, Swiss region, and trying to also ramp it up to other parts of the world, which are maybe not as advanced as the European region is today in terms of process mining, data analytics for process analytics. So so this is the kind of the background role. I've been working with process mining, I don't know, since 2005, I guess, when it comes to process mining as such. It was called workflow mining at that point in time, and up to 2013 in academia, and then from 2014 onwards in practical consulting. And it's interesting that we have today a session on operational process mining, when in 2014 we had a Dagstuhl seminar on unleashing operational process mining, almost 10 years ago. And at that time, if I was just looking at this thing before actually starting, and then looking at the report when doing the slides here, I was like, well, I actually were completely naive at that point in time, because I'm looking at completely different topics of today. But here we are today talking about operational process mining and the day-in-day-out challenge that we see here. Why process mining? Process mining is for me not only an analytical aspect of using data, but it's more like a way of thinking about systems, about processes, about how to bring together data in order to address the different challenges that we see today, be a transformation, be a migration of a system to another system, operational excellence, or audit, right? So I think for me, it's not only the fact that you have an algorithm that does something, but a way of, what is all around this algorithm. And this is so interesting to me and keeps me always motivated to use process mining for. Very good. So now, why event log engineering? Why we need this, and why this is the paramount of what we do today in practice. So if you go one step further, so usually when I was also doing research on process mining and then looking at and how process mining can be as an algorithm be better. I always bump into definitions like, okay, what is a trace? What is an event log, right? And there was always like, let L be an event log, and let's do some fancy algorithm on that, right? And this is interesting and also important when you design discovery, clustering, conformance checking algorithms, when addressing the the overfeeding, underfeeding of models, certain topics that you have seen on yesterday's and of course in the lectures to come on how to really have algorithms to do this. There were also some papers on connecting this to other BPM, other disciplines and applications, for instance, healthcare and municipalities, and for engineering the initial tool support, so that you have basically a way of constructing initial tools, right? Now, and there was one paper which was particularly interesting to me at that point in time when I was starting, actually moving towards more like operational stuff, is to say, how is the process mining really looking at in the industry if you want to do this? And then there's this paper from Will van der Aalst and others on actually how to do something as a case study, right? And when I was reading through this again, I was like, okay, well, and first of all, we construct a PetroNet of the process, and then we create an Access database which has some events in it, and then we have the EMXML, which is the predecessor for Access on the log format. And if you see the last print screen with a PetroNet and a process flow in it, and then you go, okay, this is the way we're thinking about processes back then, right? And if we fast forward it now to today, what we're going to see is a bit of a different situation, right? We're moving from PetroNets and MXML to a portfolio of 20 plus active tool suppliers with a huge market size. Only if you say 2021, which was last year, right? And mind, the last year was a post-COVID one, so it is not that representative. But if you say 8 out of 10 companies are actively working with process mining, be in a proof of value, be in a deployment, be in a rollout, or assessing different types of tools out there. So you see, well, actually, process mining is a topic that people are talking about. And this reflects on the process analytics market size that you see growing from 185 million in 2018 to 1.4 billion in 2023. So it is a huge kind of a growth from that paper to today, and this is an amazing story, right? To tell in terms of growth that we're seeing here, and why and where is it used today. So and this is a long chapter in the book and our contribution here, just for say, well, we're looking here at financial products, industrial products, services. All those industries are using process mining today, be it for claims handling, for production logistics, to curb sales. So to do everything that has to do with improvement of process, understanding of processes. And this goes from understanding to managing and steering processes all the way through. So so you have a vast applications, and I'm always surprised to see the types of processes which are subject to process mining, sometimes even those which I would not expect really to be there, such as, for instance, intrusion detection logs, but more like moving towards processes in the real sense of the word, such as procurement, sales, credit application, etc. So it's all over the place and used in a very different manner. So so what is then what is the difference then from then to today, right? In terms of what we're moving there. So the practical process mining, we're doing that in practice, does not start with let L be an event log, but rather say, okay, well, let S be a set of possibly loosely connected, possible legacies, otherwise highly customized database systems with thousands of tables with critical data, table and field names containing possibly inconsistent, poorly formatted data. And well, and then Julian and I, we got a kind of a request. Let's make a log file out of it and see what happens, right? And so this is the practical process mining, and this is what we want to give a bit of a glimpse about. So we have a process, a very complex data model on one hand on the systems and on the connection of systems, and then you get a target data model, which is a log file, which allows you then to use the tool of a preference to analyze those files. So this is where we're going to be starting looking to this today. And again, it's a journey. The more experience you have, the more the faster you are in doing so. And today we're going to give you a glimpse of what can be the challenge in doing this and what is the fun also in doing that.
All right. So the motivation, I think, is clear. A lot of the magic that happens in inventing new algorithms to go through logs and to maybe even predict traces that will happen in the future. A lot of this is based on something like an event log L, right? And in practice, unfortunately, it's not that easy to get there. Now, when we think about event log engineering in practice, there's pretty much 3 steps. And the first one, not very surprisingly, I guess, is data selection and extraction. Somewhere we need to get that data somewhere. And typically it's buried. And in order to not extract everything, we need to select a certain subset before. Then it needs to be transformed in a way, because the typical transactional systems, ERPs, or other systems that are used widely in businesses are not necessarily running on event logs, right? I think that's quite clear. We need to somehow extract those event logs from the source data. And last but not least, once the events are extracted, typical or at least current process mining tools require you to define certain things like a case identifier and certain parameters for data models that then in turn again influence the analysis opportunities as well, and also limit what you can do in those solutions. And last but not least, obviously whenever a lot of data is involved, there's also fine-tuning involved, mainly with regards to quality and performance. Now, before starting to kind of dive into these 3 steps in particular, first from a process agnostic view, and then with a particular focus on the order to cash process in SAP, enterprise resource planning, I guess it makes sense because not all of you might be kind of familiar with that process. And be aware, this has been radically simplified, right? A typical order to cash process in SAP can have hundreds, if not up to 1,000 different event types. Not each individual instance will have that many, but if you look at a large company with a big instance, multinationals that have a lot of different events, a lot of different changes, etc., then this can become super complex. To exemplify, however, what type of archetypes and different challenges we see in the data and while extracting and selecting the data, we go through an order to cash process, quite simplified. A sales order item is created in the beginning, and I'm going through the top level flow here. Then an order confirmation is sent, right? We get an order, we create an SO item, we confirm to the customer that we have actually received this order. We create a delivery document including its items, and then at a certain point, either a human or some robots go into the warehouse and pick and later on pack those products into a delivery structure. It could be delivered via truck, container, whatnot, a lot of different ways, right? But in the system backend, this all gets recorded as a delivery item dispatch. In the end, of course, we want also to make some money. So a billing item is created and hopefully paid in the future. Otherwise, dunning could be triggered. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen up or downstream of this process. Again, for simplification purposes, I think this is enough to introduce all the different archetypes of challenges. Now, to not only have a straight through, if you wish, happy flow, there's a couple of gateways introduced in 2 kind of settings, just after the sales order, or between the creation of the sales order item and its confirmation to the customer, and between the customer confirmation and the delivery creation. And here we talk about the delivery document, right? A system record, not necessarily a delivery in terms of a DHL truck goes around and delivers packages. in those two gateways, it can happen that quantity gets changed, right? Someone orders 10, but actually only needs 8, and that gets changed retrospectively. Or it's 10 and it's bumped up to 20. So the quantity changed event itself is also something we track. And as a matter of fact, in SAP, other systems might not have that, but in SAP, an automated event is kind of a trailing event for all kinds of changes in those sales order item documents. Sales order item last changed is not something that a human triggers in addition, but no matter if the quantity is changed or the price is changed or anything else is changed, this is the last changed date, which we will see it later. It doesn't even have a timestamp, but only a date. So likely some legacy reasons why this was even introduced into SAP, into this process. But for us, at least in some cases, this is very valuable information to analyze later on. Now, just for any one of you who actually knows SAP in detail, of course, this is heavily simplified. So you can't necessarily go out and map a full process in order to cache with just these events. But kind of taking 2 steps back on why we are kind of focusing so much on the difference between our reality and the academic reality. In the research environment, or what I sometimes think about as the lab environment, right? You want to have something that is in a certain way, shape, and form as event logs, to test out different approaches on how to deal with it, and those should be reproducible, etc. And a lot of things which we don't necessarily encounter in reality. The actual differences, and you see on the right side already the kind of the bullet list of things that we think research environments are, for a good reason, having as characteristics for these data sets, but we don't necessarily see in reality. And that the first bucket concerns data itself. And there's some others that might be more system-based, but the data related ones, a lot of times we don't even have data available, right? That's the first problem. If there is a process, but the system did not anticipate that a certain event needs to be tracked, it will be unavailable no matter what we do in terms of technical approach, right? Some of it is restricted use. If you think about GDPR protection, social security numbers, a lot of information about companies that do business with local governments in countries, a lot of this information is heavily restricted from being used overseas or even within the country for analysis. So this needs to be taken into consideration as well. And sometimes the complexity of the data itself is just, it has been designed in an era where maybe people were trying to save bits and bytes in terms of storage, but not necessarily looking at how easy it will be to analyze that data down the road. Unstructured data, well, it's everywhere, right? We do have unstructured data. It's not always an issue in terms of SAP, very rarely, because SAP has a relational base data model. Not everything, however, is captured in there, right? If you have a sales order confirmation that we've just seen, the content of the sales order confirmation is typically not stored in a relational format, but as a PDF somewhere and then archived. So if we would need to get back to that information, we would actually need to do optical document and character recognition on those documents again, which is, of course, in most of our scenarios and projects, not a good use of our time and energy and the effort that is spent. Sometimes it's available but inaccessible, and that could be the case if there is rules in place or regulations in place that prevent the use of this, or it's just not accessible because of the company's internal structure of how access rules for data are kind of assigned. And then last but not least, and I've already mentioned this, is a lot of times kind of overlaid with complexity, legacy systems and legacy data. We find a lot of old systems in banking, but also in shipping now, that still just save text. And if you look in the text, there is structure and there is attributes and there is metadata, but it was easier to just treat everything as text. And we'll see an example of this later on in the SAP instance as well. Now, the second one is system-wise. And of course, if something is undocumented, it's quite difficult to analyze. And only so much of retrospectively kind of re-engineering is valuable in a project that you actually need to create a business impact, a positive business impact in the end. Some of the systems are distributed. I'm not saying that research environments are all of that on the right side at the same time, but the tendency to encounter a lot of the challenges on the left side is just what we face every single day. And then last but not least, on top of data and the systems that kind of create those data points, even beyond systems, the system landscape, a lot of times is quite heterogeneous. And a very simple example for that might be a company acquires other companies, right? And if the company is run on SAP and is kind of a pure SAP shop, typically their M&A pipeline does not necessarily take the ERP system of their acquisitions into too much of a consideration when buying a company, right? So you buy companies that have a different ERP system, run virtually the same process. You also have sales orders, you also have deliveries and billing and hopefully payments from customers, but you just have a different source system. It could be Oracle and SAP or IFS or J. Edwards, other systems that support the same process, or within a system, configurations sometimes get to an extent crazy that companies just reinvent their own SAP, right? They customize it to a degree where one SAP tenant in there for a company does not really reflect the standard anymore. And then you have these challenges with the same process, but in totally different setups. The typical requests from businesses are, I just want to see my purchase to pay or order to cash, right? I don't want to deal with the complexity that there are different systems underneath. And this becomes a huge challenge in data transformation and homogenizing these data points. What we can kind of guide you with is, I mean, this is a lot of work to actually even identify where, and in one project, certain parts might be on the left side, on the right side, not stable across a project. And the very beginning of a process might be in a different system than the end. So this is something you really need to identify as early as possible, because it will affect how much effort you need to spend on these certain individual dimensions or events. And also, once a business requester says, I want this and this and this, keep these ratings in mind when you tell them how long it's gonna take, right? If they're talking about very sensitive data, this could take months even to clear that it's gonna be able, or we're gonna be able to use it. Making this transparent and documenting it is super relevant, right? Now, when we go through the typical stages, the first one is scoping, right? And that we don't even touch data at this stage. But the scoping kind of goes in four angles. The first one being, what do we actually want to analyze? And order to cash is one process, right? But within order to cash, you could have sub-processes, and say somebody's only interested in order management, which is kind of the upstream part of order to cash, or even upstream of order to cash, meaning kind of lead to agreement, things where potential customers are kind of managed to sign a contract later on, and then there's individual orders coming from that contract. Be very precise on this, including start and end events. That doesn't mean there might not be additional end events that are not anticipated coming in during the session, or during the project, but having a clear understanding with the stakeholders about start, end, and what it is that to be analyzed is super important. Region, the second one, the where, region a lot of times overlaps with legal entities, just the way our world works. Sometimes we should probably call this region/legal entity or organizational entities. This is really which part of the company or even outside the company should be analyzed. And guidance, very simple, start small. Even if you don't anticipate a lot of IT across individual organizational units in the company, experience shows there are, even if they're not transparent or known. So starting with, for example, only processes that originate in Italy would be such a filtering scope in the beginning. Then time, the third one, that's quite natural, right? Be very precise in which time you measure. Is it the order getting created or when the process is finalized, when the customer has paid? So which is the anchor to kind of scope the time? But then timing is quite an easy one. Typical settings are a full fiscal year plus the current ongoing fiscal year, right? So that is a typical setup. If that creates too much of data for the system to do, then we're kind of going into months, which becomes more tricky because seasonality could bias interpretation of results. And then last but not least, and in this case really not least, because analytical angle is we should have probably put it first, but the analytical angle is, why do we even run this analysis, right? So a lot of, and quite honestly, in the past, we have run, and consultancies do what the customers want from them, right? But we have run a process analysis that suddenly changed course into recreating a business warehouse report, which was already there and working. It's just because they thought process mining is the better approach to do that. And this is really a waste of energy and resources, right? And medium long term, this will not succeed anyways, because process mining typically we don't have a precision of a penny in those calculations. Now the what and why kind of go together, but never cease to ask why, even during the project. Don't stop with this, because in the end, a lot of the decisions, how much data to capture, how much data to transform, etc., should be, in best case, should be directly related to something that needs to be coming out of the analysis, a result, a hypothesis, something that needs to be tested. Of course, there are exploratory projects, but these are then kind of there you probably do this scoping based on your experience. Before that, it really pull in as much information from stakeholders about the why, what is it that they want to solve with this. And then the actual sourcing, and apologies, the first part of this is still not touching data. So we map the data. Once you understand what the process is, that doesn't mean you know where the data resides, and that's sometimes a huge challenge, especially when systems are customized or even custom developed, right? In shipping, we have a couple of systems that are developed solely for MERS, and those are obviously a bit tricky. Then you can't just Google and find out where data is stored. After locating the data, both for events and metadata, you also need to find, and sometimes that's kind of in go, sometimes it's different approaches. Find out where to get those filtering mechanisms that you've defined in all these angles, like the what, the when, the where, and the why. And those filtering mechanisms, sorry about that, those filtering mechanisms sometimes have a weird effect on how extractions run, because some of them need to be combined inside the source. If the filtering mechanism is dependent on something else, it can become very a performance bottleneck on the actual productive system or the mirror system, wherever you extract data from. If those systems first need to join, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 tables together and then filter dependent on something else. In these cases, it really requires a lot more energy to make sure that there is no impact on productive systems, just because we want to extract and analyze data. The last one from mapping, the data considerations, which you've already defined in the previous slide, right? The sensitivity of data also should influence what you plan in extraction. For example, if there's sensitive data that you don't necessarily need, you need to know there is something, but you don't need to know the content. There are obfuscation techniques, pseudonymization or anonymization that allow you to work with that data without actually breaching any rules or guidelines on sensitive data. And sometimes it's just being aware that this is sensitive and not extracting it in the first place, right? If not in the why, if it's not in the analytical perspective, why using it in the first place? It just creates headaches. And then we finally go to the extraction, and the extraction, of course, can happen in many different ways depending on the source system. It's very important to think about, is this a one-off effort, or do we actually want to have this in a continuous fashion? Does it need to be able to do delta updates, meaning every day only the transactions of yesterday are kind of reprocessed and not the whole full data set? All these influencing factors kind of narrow down what kind of extraction or replication mechanisms you can use. And sometimes you're lucky, and the company that you run the project for has a data lake that is already replicating data from all sorts of systems. Then, of course, you only do that for the delta that is not available in that data lake, or not current enough in that data lake. And once that is defined, you can say, okay, well, maybe I'm using certain technology to extract and replicate that into my transformation area. Please do run test configurations or extractions. The actual payload that we extract sometimes are those are terabytes of raw data, and they can run for weeks. And I'm not kidding. We have SAP extractions from productive systems. They're configured in a way that they don't overload the productive system, which is, of course, plausible, right? But then they only get a certain ratio of the processing resources and storage resources, etc. So these things can run very long, if not set up in a delta mode, etc. And to do that and not just come out with after 2 weeks with a result that doesn't actually work out for you because the data is not correctly captured, do run small test extractions. You can test everything, obfuscation, filterings, whatever is defined in a configuration. It can be tested in a smaller data set, and it should be done every time, even if I mean Rafael and I have paid so much in terms of additional effort we work because we thought we have done that 10 times already. What should go wrong the 11th time, right? Last but not least, how do we even find out that the extraction was unsuccessful or successful? Of course, there's a couple of, and I think that's not specific to process mining, checks about completeness, quality, is the scope, is the filtering correct? A couple of sample checks that go through the individual tables, so we have the right matches, etc. So I think that part is not rocket science. Now, when we actually go through the mapping, right, for our example in order to cache, the upper part we've already seen. Now, in SAP, all of this is, or most of SAP's base modules are designed around documents and their items. And the first step of mapping such an SAP-based process is finding out which documents are affected or kind of underlying those events that we want to see in the process analysis. The first one is super easy, right? There is a sales order and it contains one or more sales order items. Then order confirmation is a little bit well, more simplistic. I've already mentioned that there are typically PDFs. There's some metadata stored in this order confirmation. Not every line item in the order confirmation is stored structured. A delivery note captures including its items and billing items. Now you might question the stuff in between, picking, packing, etc. This is actually not a document itself, but it's related to the original sales documents. It's events, but still based on these few documents that we've listed here. Now, the events, they don't really they don't flow in a homogeneous manner through SAP, but it kind of and that will come up later in the data model engineering as well. The tricky thing comes in when you realize one delivery note is not actually always related to exactly one billing document. So the easy part is mapping down to the documents and their items. And then the more tricky part is later on, how do they relate to each other? But actually, even those document flows do not tell us which tables to extract and how to configure the data extraction mechanisms, right? We need to go on for, and to do that, we need to kind of map those documents now to the base tables. And in SAP, at least the standard SAP configurations, that's quite easy. You can Google, there's tons of resources. A lot of it is quite, it sounds very strange if you look at it the first time, because SAP uses a lot of cryptic field names and table names. Some of it has English-based, some of it has German-based names. But typically you will find header documents with suffixes K, KP, or HDR for header, or Kopf in German. And then items, corresponding items with a suffix BPS or POS, with position, which is quite similar to the German version. So those are, for example, VBAK is the Vertriebsbeleg Kopf, which is a sales document header, right? And the same goes for VBAP. It's the sales document, but the position to it. Same goes for all of them. We have VBAK, VBAP for the sales order and its items. We have LIKP, LIPS for the delivery note and its items. VBRK, VBRP for the billing document and its items. And then now in between, there's a couple of tables, NAST, which is capturing metadata of all outgoing messages from SAP, including the order confirmation, not only, but including. And very interestingly, in that Raphael has already kind of hinted towards, CDHDR, CDPOS are change tables in SAP. And now those change documents are, they're not specific to order to cash. They're not specific to any module, meaning all of SAP stores change documentation in those two tables, which means you can imagine those grow to massive sizes, creating more or less challenges for data extraction, but also transformation later on. And at least in the slides, I'm not sure if we're going to make it in this session, but in the slides you have a deep dive on this as well. And apologies, I just need to. Sorry. Now, the last, or the second to last part of the mapping exercise is locating relevant data within those tables, right? Here, for example, we have a VBAP, which is the sales order document item, and some of the attributes. Now, a typical VBAP table in SAP has between 200 and 300 columns. Obviously, we don't want to extract all of them, and we don't want to transform all of them. So good candidates to extract are, and you find those table configurations and structures online, are primary keys, foreign keys, and links, that is A and D and E. Also all kind of supplementary info that is around values, units, statuses, whatever could be changed is of relevance for the analytical perspectives that we have defined before. This is not, I guess, not very different other than a very much focus on the linkage and foreign keys down here, originating item and document and a material link, then other analysis techniques, right? So I think that is quite easily captured. And then last but not least, the filter itself. So we find where to look, which tables, which fields. Now, how do we limit the number of rows in those extractions? And there is direct filters. It's just a normal where clause, right? In a SQL statement, that's how we can think of it. A tenant filter, kind of the temporal filter, right, that we have defined in the beginning, and a document category, which in this case just means it should be a sales order document. But the more complex one and the more tricky part to cover also from a performance perspective is here for CDPOS, which is the change document position table. For some reason, it shows not any date information in that table. With the result that everybody who wants to extract, and typically don't want to extract change information for the last 10 years or since whenever the SAP system is running, it needs to be joined with its header, which has the update date and timestamp in there. It might seem like a small thing. Now, if CDPOS table has 2 billion rows and CD header table has 800 million rows, and those live in an IBM DB2 system, you can imagine what kind of block that could cause in a productive system, right? So this is really something where if that's required, a lot of analysis, process analysis and SAP require these events, the change events, then please make sure that you run small test scripts to actually gog if that impacts the productive system. Now that was the first step, right? Selection, extraction. Now, what do we do in transformation? We do, and that's maybe it might be a bit easily misunderstood here. Case IDs, yes, we think about case IDs, we don't define them yet. And what I mean with this, I don't select the one case ID, and I know some of the toolings push that boundary. That's the flexibility on the horizon under number 3. We all want to have flexible case identifiers in the future. Current reality is most tools require you to define that preloading, right, or during the load. We don't define case IDs yet, but we define candidates in the stage. So the most likely one, so that later on the same database can be reused for multiple process analysis. And of course, if those documents and events flow and the process flow across multiple systems, it's very crucial to identify what are the mappings in between the systems. So maybe something starts in a warehouse management system and then ends up in SAP. You have IDs in both systems that have nothing to do with each. If you want a process that starts in one, ends in the other, there needs to be a mapping in between. And this is crucial in this stage. A lot of challenges, and I don't know, I mean, that's kind of the normal thing about process mining, right? Timestamps are, it's seemingly easy, right? You just take the most precise one that you get and you go with it. But it comes with so many changes. First of all, precision. If all your timestamps are on the same precision, meaning maybe minute level, you don't have any challenge. Within the same minute, there can be multiple events happening, and then you sort them by an additional mechanism, typically sorting or ordering columns, right? Now, if they are mixed, it becomes super tricky, right? If you have one, for example, invoice due date is a date. You don't have a time. And then you have things that happen on that date are then shown after or before or what. It just becomes super tricky once you mix different precision levels, and you need to be aware of them and their effect on the analysis. Now, time zones could be a whole chapter on its own, right? So time zones, we do have, of course, in a system that we wish for, and the reality that we hope for is that the system is set up in UTC, everything is in UTC. And of course, if you have multiple systems that a process spans, then you need to typically check their setting. Now, later on, we'll see SAP again doing something different. But so the normal approach is with reasonable certainty, still check off for it, but reasonable certainty in one system, one time zone is used. And as soon as you cross systems, double check and harmonize those, right? Otherwise, the ordering just gets screwed up, and throughput times, service level agreements, all these analyses are unusable. Then, of course, you need to find a way to get everybody on the same page, which is the correct time zone to harmonize to. Last but not least, atomicity. What we define as an event, and that is just from kind of having a lot of different discussions within projects, an event has one timestamp. And a lot of activities, or the wording activity, has been used extensively with a start and an end timestamp and a duration in between. It's all fun, but we don't touch that terminology because it introduces challenges, especially because typically you don't have, for all things that happen in a process, a start and an end. For some you do, and then you can do a semantical analysis on those throughput times as well. But we actually create two events out of it if necessary. And a lot of the SAP-based structuring is only one timestamp. It just stores when it stores, it kind of, when the user clicks save, that timestamp is used. Nobody knows when the user started to process a certain record. The amount handling is the third and last part of the data transformation step. Now, amount handling, duplication is a bit weird to wrap your head around in the first instance. Once you have, let's just think very simplistic. You have an event log, no additional tables, event log only. You have an order to cash process, and this order to cash process has an invoice, some approval cycle, right? And the approval cycle goes through mostly only once, and then sometimes it's kind of reset and goes through a second time. So you will end up with the same event multiple times in a process instance, which is absolutely fine and super interesting to analyze. However, if you then have, for this individual order, metadata associated, for example, a value, US dollars, 500 US dollars, and you just aggregate in the front end of any tooling, there's virtually no way for the tooling to know that this is actually not 1,000, but only 500 US dollars. So that duplication occurs if we have information that is actually document-related information, but we flatten it into an event log or a case table or any other table where it creates duplication. There is no golden way of making sure that never happens, but it's super helpful to have to know about it and to know, once you see weird numbers in the front end, where to look for. And then there's a multitude of ways to kind of tweak this to only sum up the right amounts. But nothing is worse than us presenting to senior management saying, hey, your procurement volume in the last year was, I don't know, 3 billion US dollars. And they look at you and say, it's not even 1 billion. Get your numbers straight, come back. And that is like, those situations happen. It's not just textbook. It happened to me personally as well. but we learn, right? So duplication, super important. Do your sanity checks also before presenting anything on a base table count and volume versus what you show then in the actual data model in the front end of the process mining tool of choice, right? And the last one, heterogeneity. You can imagine. I mean, I've already used US dollars now, but so one invoice is, or one order is US dollars, the next one is euros, the next one is zloty. There's so many different currencies, and also others could have different units, right? If we think about liquid ounces versus the metric formats, etc. Make sure that if you encounter this type of heterogeneity in the data, harmonize it before putting it in any front end. No user will be able to understand and do case when or whatnot in the front end itself. And that bears a whole lot of additional challenges, right? Which exchange rate do you use for translating them into US dollars? Yeah, so those are day in, day out challenges in data transformation. We do all of this before even thinking about loading into the tool, right? Now, applied to order to cash, well, the case identifier, again, we don't choose it yet. We choose candidates. Very easy in our example because we just reuse our data linkage model, right, with some added multiplicities. We know that the VBAP, the position table for the sales order items, always has one header, and vice versa. One header has potentially multiple items. And then the sales order and the delivery and the billing are connected with each other on item level. There's some other connections, but for simplicity reasons, this is it. And the primary IDs of all of those tables, we just in as candidate IDs for later on selection of the case ID. And that also, this approach, it's very handy because once the tools actually catch up and allow you to have a more flexible case ID selection later on, all of this pre-work is still valid, right? If the tools get upgraded, we can still retain a lot of the data transformation and only need to replace kind of the top layer. Now, with the timestamps, in our example, we do have immutable ones, creation date and time. And in the first example, we do have mutable ones. Already kind of touched it in the beginning. There is an auto populated field, AEDAT, which is the Änderungsdatum in German, which is the last change date. There's no time information. So again, different precisions already present themselves here, right? So you have date on the one side and a second precision on the first line. Those two are quite easy to grasp and check whether or not you even need them in the analysis. The last one, log entries. So those are the change documents and also some of the status changes. Now here, the change documents, they have, as previously mentioned, they have a date and time. However, not on the position level. So we also need to somehow link them to the originating document, because in the change document itself, it doesn't say, hey, I'm, at least not directly, I'm a change of the order quantity for a specific order here and there, right? Unfortunately, because it's used in all those change documents are used in all modules of SAP. They are using some sort of a legacy approach with textual representation, and you see more of that in the deep dive slides where we actually lead you through an example of how to link that back. But those three archetypes of timestamps and events are pretty much reoccurring across SAP. Now, there is, I've mentioned timestamps are difficult across systems. In SAP, since a lot of the modules were also kind of well, acquired and then integrated into SAP by the firm itself. Even within the system, there can be different setups for time zones. Most of it is the system time zone that is set up when configuring the SAP system. However, in certain parts of the system, for example, in warehouse management, which I think at a certain point was a acquisition, it uses the time zone of the user who triggered the record to be created, which comes with a whole slew of challenges for us, because the could be retrospectively deleted later on, then you don't know which time zone he or she was in. The time zone could have been changed for that user because they got relocated from, I don't know, from Stuttgart to Bangalore. And all sorts of things can happen between the record getting created and us extracting and analyzing the record. So if you find a whole slew of weird timestamps in the front end, that is a good thing to check, at least, right? And if that's the reason, there's also, again, no golden rule to just mitigate and fix, but it's good to know what part actually is off and why. And then you can find a way to fix. Mount handling, just exemplarily, right? I think currency harmonization is the most frequent one, also in SAP. There's a whole number of tables in SAP. They all start with T, C, U, R, and then something that are used in weird and various ways to exchange currencies into each other. And the interesting part here is, of course, you need a reference date, because if you retrospectively convert currencies, then you want to take a currency conversion rate of the date that was actually accurate on the day where the record was created. Sometimes that is the invoice date, sometimes that's the date when something got booked. But it's a business decision, right? Which currency to use. Now, a weird, and that was the hint before with legacy or complex data with SAP. We actually, first time I looked at a gültig BIS, or whatever that is called, validity of a currency exchange rate in SAP, it's stored with, it has a field that says valid to, but then inside you see things like 79779294 stored as a string, not even a number. And that just means if you digit-wise invert that from a 99999, then you get to the actual date until which it's. I have to, don't ask us in the end who decided that SAP to use inverted dates in this instance. Some of the other parts of SAP don't. They use human readable date, but in this case it's inverted. So yeah, just keep that in mind when analyzing those things. The last step of the three, data model engineering and fine-tuning. Again, now without a specific focus on order to cash in SAP, and then we apply it to the order to cash in SAP. The first part is about the different tables or artifacts that we typically see in data models for process mining solutions. And not surprisingly, there's an event log, and there's a case table and a case table. One kind of entry there has typically multiple or an arbitrary number of lines in an event log table, and each event is directly related to one case. Now, these two, it's quite neural and easy to understand. One is really on event level, one is on case level or process instance level. Now, the auxiliary tables are a bit more tricky. We've talked before about additional information from sales orders or from invoice documents, billing documents, and a way to prevent duplication of values like US dollars, etc., in those attributes. When you sum them up, because you want to, I don't know, report an affected volume of a certain process variation, right? You would filter the process variation, and then you would have a sum on that kind of volume, and it would just say, I don't know, 200,000 US dollars. Now, if we store this in an auxiliary table where each of the document entries only gets one row rather than flattening it into event or cases, then we prevent, as far as the or as long as the tooling supports this and doesn't flatten internally just anyways, we prevent duplication, right? It's like a relational schema then in the process mining tooling, and the relationship between these auxiliary tables and event or cases can be anything other than one-to-one. If it's one-to-one, why don't we even have auxiliary tables, right? Then we can put it in cases or event log. However, the linkage makes it a little difficult. That could be end-to-end, worst case, right? Which makes it more and more difficult for the tooling to interpret these relationships correctly and decide what to show and what to sum up. Just imagine one line in the aux table, one aux table, right? It's not one, it's in our situations, Raphael's shown a data model, it had like, I don't know, 20 aux tables. One of the rows in one of the aux tables relates to two cases, because both of the cases are invoiced with the same invoice. Let's say it's an order to cash, right? We sell two sales, the same customer orders two things and we ship it together because we optimize shipping costs, right? And we bill it together, so it has one invoice. We have invoice metadata in an aux table, and this is related to two cases then, because our cases were defined in based on a sales order item, which is two individual ones. Now, if we filter out one of these cases in the front end of a process mining tool, right? Because they have different flows, might have, right? They just share an invoice. Should the tooling still treat the full line in the aux table as being relevant? One is filtered out, the other one is not, like 50%. There's no simple solution. So either it's fully there or it's not there. To split it in half doesn't make sense for anything other than a unit information, right? This is a real tricky part. Now, as long as your lines in the auxiliary tables, based on all the filtering, are either fully in or fully out, then it's easy and it will be consistent across the process mining model. However, that's not always, you're not always able to reach that state. And those, depending on your why, again, coming back to the analytical angle, this is really relevant to understand, do we even need this kind of complexity? Or is it just a nice to have field or type of information that is actually not needed to answer the questions your stakeholders originally asked? It's always nice to add stuff after, but if that's resulting in this type of challenges, it will, it made ourselves busy for weeks and weeks and weeks until we realized that it's actually not, it's not contributing to the overarching originally set trajectory and objectives. So just a caveat here, right? I think once that happens and you play around with auxiliary tables, they can help a lot. They can alleviate some of the other challenges. They can also introduce things. Now, the actual engineering, here we choose a case ID. Now, out of the candidate case IDs, this can be a bit of an art. to choose the right one, and wouldn't be the first time that we choose one and then we revoke that choice and we choose another one, or we choose multiple ones and have multiple models at the same time being analyzed depending on what questions you want to ask or be answered. And here again, let the analytical angle be your guide. Which one is the right one? There is no golden rule in order to cache. It's always VBAP. It's really down to the
So I guess Julian's just frozen. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so thanks a lot. Yeah, so just taking over from Julian, so kind of a seamless thing. So yeah, again, without the support, its ability to transform new process traces, not only merge those existing. This is tricky depending on the data that you have, and also depending on transformations that you get at the end of the day. So I think this is a very important one. Now I'm not seeing the screen anymore, of course, but I'll share that with you. Just a minute. Okay, anyways, wait a second. You're back, Julian. Super.
I am back. Yes,
yeah, I also, okay, because then it was just gone.
Am I still sharing?
No, not yet. Yes, okay. Now you do.
All right, reconnect Wi-Fi. Good, but the Delta support, I think the modular you've still heard. So the Delta support, the last one, we've encountered it a couple of times already, that after successfully finalizing a project, someone, and that's actually attributing to a successful project, the users want this to be continuous or become continuous. And in this case, once a certain data volume is crossed or is superseded, then you can't rerun the whole calculation and everything every day for the full data set. And data transformation with a stable data set is different from you get a new chunk and you need to somehow merge it later on in the overall data set. So that's the Delta support, that if you already know this will become such a project or will have such a use case later on, you can already design the whole transformation from the get-go in that way. And using a Delta approach, we have humongous installations. There's billions of events in individual data models that can be analyzed. Yeah, so it's sometimes we just need to find our own bottlenecks and fix them first. The last part here is data model design, and I'll do that very, very briefly. Basic, advanced, and future. Future we've already kind of teased a little bit, right? In the future, both academia, also us in the task force on process mining, and software vendors are working on making this necessity of defining a case ID upfront a thing of the past. And this will incredibly change and substantially change how people interact with process mining software, and how much of effort needs to go into redefining models, because now different questions are asked. That's the future. The current state is there is some approaches where a basic, and some projects where a basic approach with just an event log and a cases table is absolutely fine. And one example here is probably IT service management, right? In IT service management, you have tickets, and the ticket, well, that's kind of the whole life cycle of the whole process, right? So you don't really need to have a lot of up or downstream additional documents, and there's no NM relationships in between. And if you realize you're able to do a project without going for auxiliary tables, leave them be. right? They solve something, but they introduce challenges along the way as well. And then the advanced setup for data models, yes, that's just with auxiliary tables, right? So it helps to reduce the footprint because there is no flattening and duplication of all of that data. But it also introduces a little more complexity when you then analyze the data. Now apply this to our order to cash example, right? So for us, a good first step is asking the stakeholders, right? And they will typically, if they're in order management, they will typically say, well, we mainly think about
and just continue here. So basically they will think about the sales orders and sales order lines, right? And and whilst doing so, the idea is really to focus on.
Rafael, please,
Yeah.
remember that we only have 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
So
okay. So, but
remember
but
that, keep up time, because we only have
but then we have 5 minutes left, and I mean, we have slides, and slides are going to be shared anyways with you, right? And then we go really step by step on also the more practical stuff. What I would like to then to focus on, because I mean, 5 minutes, I think we are now certainly there. We might need actually to go to the question and answer, because we have exactly 5 minutes, right? How's that?
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you for the presentation. My question is, have you experienced any challenge regarding the regarding choosing the starting and ending, start and end point of your event log? Because in any moments of time, there are some cases that have not started, and your log, you're seeing the log regarding the half of the way, and there are some cases that have not been to the end, have not reached to
This is the so-called
a challenge for you also in practice.
Yes, this is the so-called cutoff effect, right? So for instance, suppose I'm taking data from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That might some transactions that might be over, right? So just go from the last year to the this year's or the next one. And these are the so-called incomplete transactions. So what we usually do in order to look at this, that we look at those transactions which go end to end, or the definition of a process end to end. So for instance, if I look in order management, we would say, right, order management means I'm creating a sales order up to the point I create delivery, right? And then I focus only on those activities, on process executions, which take this shape. But the other ones I just take it out, right, for the sake of simplicity, but also for the sake of completeness and correctness. But this is a usual problem. Yes.
For the presentation. Yeah, I missed it in the a little bit loud. I missed it a bit how you deal with the outliers, because we know that SAP systems sometimes has some weird data like batch input. I know from experience, I have worked in a client that they had in their production system, sales.
Sorry, I could not understand the question. I think it broke.
I think it was how we deal with outliers.
Yeah, exactly.
Batch processing, etc.
Do you want to take this one? I guess I just understood that there's dealing with batch processes and outliers. So usually we mention, when there's a batch process in this, we understand when there's a batch process there. Because of the user type, so we know when a batch or batch steps are going to be happening. And what we do is, if we want to focus only on those manual interactions, that is manual touch points in the process, understand, what's user really doing, we just disconsider those points which are taken by a workflow user, and by doing so, focusing only on those steps which are necessary. But of course, all depends on the analytical focus that you have in the analysis, right? So if that it is the thing that you are looking at, that is you're You want to see the manual touch points, and you can take the workflows out and focus on your desk.
Much for a presentation. I would come back to the very beginning where you mentioned something about not assuming that you have an event log at the start as a starting point, but instead having like a data source of some kind. But I think you can go even a bit earlier and ask what happens if the client that owns the data doesn't actually have any business processes defined, just has a data set that they give to you, and it basically records multiple processes together. So you have a mess of different processes and data from those. Have you encountered that in practice, and how would you approach that?
Julian.
So that's a very academic question. There is no business that has not attempted to document run processes in a Fisher. How well it matches with the reality and the data, a big question mark always.
Yeah. Does this answer your question?
Move on.
Here's the next one.
Thank you very much. I have a question on the data extraction. It seems in the presentation that you would be extracting from a production environment, SAP, where this has some performance issues on the system, I believe. So would you be using a data warehouse, and what would be the disadvantages or advantages of using data from data warehousing or staging platforms instead of using production data?
So actually, there is no disadvantage in using an intermediate data warehouse in between. From the point of view that as long as this data is fresh, coming from the system and as current data, we can use this data as a data extraction. And usually this is the preferred way for clients as well, right? Because we touch in their systems, production systems, that's something which not happen quite often. So the advantage, I think, it is certainly the perimeter of certainty that you have in order to not touch their systems. The disadvantage, again, it requires that this data is being refreshed in a let's say in a short time period, right? For instance, if you're going to have real-time applications, so it means that you need to build a kind of a bridge between the core system, the data warehouse, and for instance the end application that you're using in order to analyze the process. And it's a bit more engineering compared to others, but it is all doable. I mean, it's not too much of work.
Let's thank the speakers, and the session is over.
Thank you very much.